One of the long-running gags that's used to make a character change gender is we've got to go undercover. And there have been a lot of stupid stories that it's usually played for humor, where people are laughing at the character. When a man disguises himself as a woman, there's a recurring theme that he's degrading himself because women are inferior. And also you'll see storylines where women will disguise themselves as a male character because it will make them more intimidating. And panelists, let's have a round table on your thoughts and experience with drag disguise comedies or gender change as the result of a caper.
Well, I think one of the key things is that when it's usually a male character dressing up as a female character, not only is it because, it's trying to go in disguise or whatever, but it's this idea that he's less threatening and he's, easy to be taken as a target, which is usually the point of why he's dressing in drag, to flush out the bad guy, so to speak, or, whoever's supposed to attack him. Which, I don't know if it would be as effective if it was done in today's world, or a lot of today's stories where women are actually now, some of them are viewed as being able, physically handle themselves in a confrontation or, against bad guys.
Yeah, and I think it really highlights gender identity and gender roles as these two very distinct things, and we see it all the more clearly when they're switched. For example, having male characters cross the gender line into feminine gender expression. There are certain connotations that come with that. The idea that the femininity is sorry, I'm just losing my train of thought real quick. that it's lesser, and it's, look how strange that this person is, that they're now trying to put on these feminine qualities. Their facial structure doesn't match our idea of what a feminine person is supposed to be. Their height, their body shape, and these people aren't real women, which is a very poignant idea, especially when these are bodies that real women have. Transgender women oftentimes don't fit into the mainstream idea of what female bodies are supposed to be, and yet their gender identity should be enough to validate that. Same the other way, when a female-bodied person is transitioning or disguised as not disguised, but disguised is another interesting point too. The idea that there's some sort of deviation, some sort of a deception going on when people dress in different genders or have different gender expressions.
An inherently malevolent intent.
Yes. Yes, you're fooling us. There must be something shifty or shady about you. And yet, or if you're not revealing who you truly are, or what your body is, what's underneath your clothes, what's underneath your expression, then you're not an honest person. And yet, how is any trans person supposed to be constantly, or why should they be expected to divulge everything about what's under their clothes when cisgender people don't have to do that on a regular basis too?
And that gender expression, that's for transgender people, that is the true expression of who they are. Dressing as the gender you were assigned at birth, that's the disguise for a lot of people.
I can't think of any particular storylines offhand, but I just remember even at a young age, I never thought a lot of this stuff was funny. People around me would be laughing and I would be like, I don't understand why making fun of this is funny. And I still don't for the most part, and if ever I see something that does it right, it's usually flipping it around onto the audience so that it'll make them realize that it really is not that funny.
Speaking of not funny, there are a lot of storylines that involve curses, where the character is forcibly changed gender, not because they're trying to infiltrate the bad guys, but because they've been hit by an alien energy ray that changes gender, or they've fallen into a magical Chinese spring that turns you into a little redheaded girl, or you've angered Odin and now he's going to humble you by turning you into a beautiful woman. Panelists, please discuss these crazy curses.
Well, it's the idea of punishment that's really, key about this concept, is that somebody did something they shouldn't have, and it's never usually an innocent person. It's somebody who, like for example, the case of Camelot 3000, which is the character in the lower panel in the middle. If you don't know what Camelot 3000 was, that was a 12-issue maxi series that DC published in the 80s. And ironically, it's one of my personal, key stories to read because I was coming out at the time, and this character Isolde, if you know of Tristan and Isolde, the Arthurian tales, where Isolde was betrothed to another man, and Tristan was a knight of the Round Tables, and they had this forbidden love. So in Camelot 3000, they were all reincarnated, and so of course, the irony is that Isolde was reincarnated as a woman, and Tristan was reincarnated as a woman. And Tristan had issues with that, big time. But Isolde's like, hey, I'm not betrothed anymore, let's get together. And, Tristan's like, no, we need to be a man and a woman, I'm not worthy enough for you. So, Tristan had his baggage from, being the big burly knight who was raping people back in, the times of Arthur. And Isolde's just waiting. But like I said, for someone like me at that time, for the material that was on the market at that time, it was very revolutionary, because seeing two women who were drawn, to be very attractive, to be very capable, at a time that I needed those kind of role models. But of course, 20 years later, I'm looking at it and I just kind of roll my eyes. But it's still, you can't quite deny the fact that there was importance at that time and place.
And at the same time, I think forcing someone into another gender is a really good punishment, because who wants to be in a gender that they don't identify with? That's sort of the transgender struggle, actually, is that society is categorizing and labeling them a certain way that doesn't match how they feel. And same with cisgender people too. One thing that I try to convey my experience. I say, imagine waking up the next day and being in a different gender. How would that make you feel? You would probably miss your old gender if that's not how you identified. So yeah, there is a real discomfort being misaligned in these ways. And so, interestingly, I actually think that it works as a curse.
Well, it also
It's usually not written, though, as something written in the way that you're explaining it. It's usually
Right.
written to as a curse that you want to get out of. And I don't know, can you think of a good example where that's been portrayed
absolutely.
properly?
We're all in on the fact, oh my gosh, the idea of changing gender itself is so deplorable. As opposed to any individual character's experience with it. Since we're supposed to be along for the ride, the audience is invited to share just this idea of transition, of this gender transgression as being awful. That's often how I see these stories being written.
And
interestingly, within that, it is actually a fitting punishment, I see, on a personal level, character level.
And many of these are intended to punish someone that's sexist by showing them what it's like to live in the other gender's, cultural roles. But often they'll do a good job of addressing sexism, but not actually address what it's like being a transgender person. And that could just be as simple as one line of someone else saying, "Do you know how many people would love to have that curse?" And you almost never see a scene like that in one of these stories.
Yeah.
Well, I think also it's an interesting byproduct that if you do look at some of the better executed curse storylines, is that it also clarifies the distinction between gender identity and gender attraction. Because more often than not, the people who are cursed, they're usually not suddenly attracted to, the sex that they weren't attracted to before. So there's that parallel of, trying to say, okay, just because you're in this body, like I said, not all stories do this, but some stories are very well saying, you know, I'm in this other body, but I still love you, whoever, you know, that person was who didn't change their gender. And they do sometimes explore that, but like I said, it has to be one of the better executed storylines to have that conveyed effectively.
And now, even though there's been a lot of bad stuff in the last 70 years, for the last 25 years, we've started to see a lot of characters where there's a person in a comic book who just happens to be transgender. Sometimes they have superpowers, sometimes they're the friend of the superhero, and let's just talk about some of the characters that have done real-world gender change, not science fiction or fantasy, but people who are real transsexuals or cross-dressers that just happen to be in a comic where, you know, maybe their friends have superpowers.
Well, who do we got up there? I can
Oh,
see.
well,
Sandman.
Okay,
yes,
okay.
we do have Wanda from Sandman, for those of you who've read that.
I like approaching transgender characters from this standpoint a lot better because it seems to humanize them a little more. It still doesn't go completely far enough to fully flesh them out as full characters because again, there's not that transgender superhero on the cover yet. They're often still supporting characters, and their storylines tend to be pretty stereotypical and tragic as well. There's hardly any transgender storylines that end positively and happily. More often suicide or death or homicide. But I feel like it definitely is a step up from the earlier models with the cheesy plot devices.
Well, with Alicia, I wanted to establish that she was bisexual for one thing, and she does end up with a happy ending because, spoilers, she does get married and her spouse is pregnant. So I wanted to have a character that was rounded in that way, and that Barbara Gordon would go to her wedding, and it was just a beautiful wedding that she went to for her friend and her spouse. And I just thought in this particular case it was important. And it, you know, when the character, first of all, there's always so many rumors. And first of all, people were accusing DC of doing this as a publicity stunt, which, you know, after I explained to you how the character came about, it absolutely was not a publicity stunt. I did 2 interviews, period, prior to the issue coming out. One was for a very small LGBTQ site, and another one I think was Comic Vine. I don't remember exactly, but and then things got reposted, and so it seemed, I think, like there was a lot more publicity that there was. And then there was a horrible joke told on the Conan O'Brien show that none of us had anything to do with, and so there was a little bit of you know, negativity in the beginning, and I did get a few emails that were kind of not so pleasant, but the positive emails and the positive response outweighed the negatives so much. And then to have, like I had a dad come through my signing line one time, and he said, I really just wanted to thank you for Alicia because my daughter and I read Batgirl together every month. And I was reading her that issue, and after Alicia comes out, my daughter said, Daddy, what's transgender? And so he stopped and explained to her what it was, and I really feel that that's a young girl who will grow up and never bully or make fun of or ridicule a trans person. And I think that characters that are like that you know, we could be a roommate with, learn and meet every day, especially when it's someone's first experience with that and it's positive, it can have a pretty good effect, I think, in the long run. Which, you know, I did cry.
Yeah, I find it so funny when parents